The Midnight Door, a supernatural horror novella. Chapter 1. The Urban Legend. The apartment smelled like old people and regret. I stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the accumulated debris of moving day, and tried to convince myself that the rent was worth it. $300 a month for a one-bedroom in a college town was practically theft, the good kind, where I was stealing from an absentee landlord who hadn't updated the listing photos since 1987. The water-stained ceiling, the carpet that had once been beige and was now the color of despair, the radiator that clanked like a chain gang in the night. None of that had made it into the advertisement. Neither had the mirror. It dominated the wall opposite the windows, an enormous antique thing in an ornate iron frame, black with age and neglect. The glass itself was slightly warped, giving my reflection a subtle wrongness, as if I were looking at a version of myself that had been ever so slightly melted. When I'd first toured the apartment, I'd assumed it was a temporary fixture, something the previous tenant had left behind. "It's bolted to the wall," the property manager had told me, not quite meeting my eyes. "The landlord says it stays." I should have asked more questions, but the rent was $300, and I was a graduate student surviving on teaching assistant wages and the leftover sandwiches from faculty meetings. Questions were a luxury I couldn't afford. Now, 3 weeks into my tenancy, I'd grown accustomed to the mirror's presence the way you grow accustomed to a scar. I didn't look at it if I could help it. Something about the glass made my skin crawl, though I could never articulate exactly why. The reflection was just slightly wrong. The shadows didn't fall quite right, and sometimes, though I told myself this was just old glass and bad lighting, sometimes my reflection seemed to move a half-second slower than I did. "Jesus, Mara, this place is a shithole." I turned to find Jess in the doorway, her arms full of pizza boxes and her face full of judgment. Behind her, Derek and Casey were already pushing past, arguing about where to set up the speakers. "It's $300 a month," I said, the same defense I'd been offering since the lease was signed. "It looks like a murder scene from a true crime podcast." Jess dropped the pizzas on my tiny kitchen counter and immediately zeroed in on the mirror. "Holy shit, is that thing haunted?" "It's antique," she said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." She walked toward it, and I felt an irrational urge to pull her back. "Seriously, where did this come from? It looks like something from a Victorian funeral parlor." "It came with the apartment. It's bolted to the wall." "Bolted? Who bolts a mirror to a wall?" "Someone who doesn't want you moving it," Derek said, joining us. He was already on his third beer he'd started in the car, and his eyes had that glassy sheen of comfortable intoxication. "You know what this reminds me of? That thing I saw online, the Midnight Door thing." Casey looked up from where she was untangling fairy lights. "The what?" "The Midnight Door ritual." Derek pulled out his phone, thumbs flying. "It's getting huge, like millions of views. Some girl in Ohio claimed she found out where her missing grandmother hid her inheritance. A guy in Texas supposedly asked about his future and then won the lottery. And let me guess, they all have Patreons you can subscribe to for more content?" I said. "I'm just saying, if there was ever a mirror for this kind of thing," Derek gestured at the dark glass looming behind us, "this would be it." I wanted to tell them no. The word was right there on my tongue, practical and sensible and absolutely certain. But Jess was already grinning that grin she got when she decided something was going to happen, and Casey was Googling the ritual on her own phone, and Derek was opening another beer like the matter was settled. "It has to be at exactly 3 a.m., Casey read aloud. "You stand before a mirror in complete darkness. You knock 3 times on the glass and say, 'I knock upon the door between. I knock upon the door unseen. By the 3rd knock, let me in.'" "That rhymes. Demons love rhymes," Jess said. "It's not demons, it's just the other side."
communication with spirits. People have been doing this stuff for centuries. I looked at the mirror. My reflection looked back, and for just a moment I could have sworn the glass rippled, like the surface of dark water disturbed by something passing beneath. "Fine," I heard myself say, "but if this awakens ancient evil, you're all helping me move." At 2:58 a.m., we gathered before the mirror in the dark. The pizza was gone. The beer was mostly gone. The joking had faded into something quieter, more tense, as the reality of what we were about to do settled over us. It was just a game. We all knew it was just a game. But there's something about standing in absolute darkness at 3 in the morning that makes everything feel significant. The apartment was silent except for our breathing and the distant hum of traffic outside. "1 minute," Casey whispered, watching her phone. I could see the mirror in the faint glow of streetlights through my thin curtains. My reflection was a smudge, a shadow, barely human. Beside me, Jess's breathing was too fast, though she'd never admit to being nervous. "Okay," Casey said. "Now." I raised my hand to the glass. It was cold, colder than it should have been, colder than the room. The sensation crept up my arm like ice water in my veins. I knocked 3 times. The sound was wrong. It didn't sound like knocking on glass. It sounded like knocking on a wooden door, hollow and resonant, and the echoes seemed to last too long, rolling away into distances that my small apartment couldn't contain. "I knock upon the door between," we recited together, our voices strange and thin in the dark. "I knock upon the door unseen. By the 3rd knock, let me in." The temperature dropped. I felt it like a physical blow, the warmth draining from the room so suddenly that I saw my breath cloud in front of me. The streetlight outside flickered once, twice, and in the stutter of light and shadow, I thought I saw something move in the mirror. Not our reflections, something behind them. "Let me in," we finished. Silence. Long, stretching silence, thick as wool and twice as suffocating. Then, from somewhere deep inside the mirror, there was a knock. Just one, faint and distant, like someone tapping on glass from very far away. "Did you hear that?" Derek whispered. "Pipes," Jess said immediately. "Old building, old pipes." Another knock, closer this time, more insistent. The lights came back on with a buzz of electricity, flooding the room with ordinary yellow warmth. We stood there, blinking at each other, hearts pounding, feeling foolish and terrified in equal measure. "Well," Casey said after a moment, her laugh shaky, "that was creepy as hell. I'm gonna need more wine." They drifted away from the mirror, already converting their fear into a story they would tell at parties, a funny anecdote about the time they tried a stupid internet ritual. I moved to follow them, but in the corner of my eye, I caught my reflection. It wasn't moving. I turned. The reflection turned. Normal, everything normal, except, and I told myself I imagined this. I told myself it was a trick of the light. For just 1 second, my reflection's eyes had been looking somewhere else, not at me, past me, behind me, at something I couldn't see. And as I watched, my reflection slowly smiled. I hadn't smiled. I hadn't smiled at all.
They left around 4 in the morning, still laughing, still treating it as a joke. I laughed with them. I walked them to the door and promised to text the group chat if any ghosts appeared. I waved as they drove away, and then I closed the door and stood alone in my apartment with the mirror that wouldn't stop watching me. I told myself it had been the beer, the late hour, the power of suggestion combined with old glass and bad lighting. By the time I crawled into bed, I'd almost convinced myself. By the time I fell into fitful sleep, I'd almost forgotten the way my reflection's smile had looked, too wide, too knowing, like a secret I didn't want to understand. The next day was aggressively normal. Sunlight poured through my windows, burning away the shadows of the night. I had papers to grade and research to compile, and a meeting with my thesis advisor that I couldn't miss.
The mirror was just a mirror in the daylight, its glass dull and ordinary, my reflection nothing more than my reflection. Stress, I decided, moving stress, new apartment stress, graduate school stress layered upon stress until my brain started manufacturing horrors to process the overload. I left the apartment that morning without looking at the mirror. I came home that evening and immediately looked at the mirror. I couldn't help it. It drew my eye the way a wound draws fingers, irresistible and unwelcome. In the early evening gloom, with the sun setting behind clouds and the overhead light buzzing in its ancient fixture, the glass seemed deeper than it should, less like a reflective surface and more like a window into somewhere else. I made myself look away. I made dinner, microwave ramen, the dinner of champions. I graded papers until my eyes crossed. I fell asleep on the couch, the television muttering quietly to itself, and I dreamed of doors that opened onto darkness. At exactly 3 a.m., I woke to knocking. 3 knocks, measured, deliberate, coming from the wall where the mirror hung. I lay frozen on the couch, my heart slamming against my ribs, my breath caught in my throat. The television had switched itself off. The apartment was perfectly dark, perfectly silent, except for the fading echoes of those 3 knocks, rolling away into corners I couldn't see. Nothing, probably nothing. Old building, old pipes, just like Jess had said. Sound travels strangely in old buildings. There were apartments above me, beside me, full of people who might be moving furniture or hanging pictures or doing whatever people did at 3 in the morning. I sat up. The mirror was directly in my line of sight, a rectangle of deeper darkness against the shadowed wall. And standing in that darkness, I saw a figure. Not my reflection. I could see my reflection, sitting up on the couch, visible in the faint light leaking in from the street. This was something else, someone else. A girl, pale as moonlight, standing behind me in the mirror, in the space where there was only a wall in the real room. I spun around. Nothing. Empty apartment. Shadows and silence and the ordinary shapes of furniture. I turned back to the mirror. She was still there. She was young, younger than me, maybe 16 or 17. Her hair was dark and lank, hanging around a face that was almost too thin, too hollow. She was wearing something old-fashioned, a dress that looked like it came from another decade, maybe several decades ago. And she was looking at me with an expression of such desperate urgency that I felt it like a physical pressure against my chest. Her mouth moved. She was trying to say something, but no sound came through, just the silent working of lips, words I couldn't hear, a message I couldn't receive. I stepped toward the mirror. She pressed her hand against the glass from the other side. The surface rippled where she touched it. I saw it ripple. I know I saw it ripple. And then the mirror dissolved into something else entirely. Images, flashing, fragmentary, like a corrupted video file playing at triple speed. A church, old stone walls and broken pews, stained glass windows shattered into colored teeth. The mirror, this mirror, the same iron frame, hanging where an altar should be, reflecting nothing but darkness. Water, black water rising, filling a space I couldn't identify, and a girl thrashing beneath the surface, mouth open in a silent scream. A rope, worn and fraying, knotted into a shape I didn't want to recognize, hanging from a beam that might have been in a church or a barn or a room very much like mine. Eyes, hundreds of them, thousands of them, crowded into the darkness behind the glass, all of them watching, all of them hungry. The images cut out like a television switching off. The mirror went dark, and then it was just a mirror again, showing me my own terrified face and the empty room behind me. But for just one moment, just one single moment before the vision ended, I had seen the girl again, and she had mouthed 2 words, clear enough that I could read them on her lips. Don't look. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat on the couch with all the lights in the apartment blazing, my back to the mirror, my phone clutched in my hands. I drafted and deleted a dozen texts to Jess. What would I even say? Hey, remember that ritual we did as a joke? Pretty sure I'm being haunted now. Also, there's a dead girl in my mirror who's really keen on the concept of water and nooses. By the time dawn broke, I'd convinced myself it hadn't happened. Sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, my brain processing the stress of the ritual and the suggestion of ghosts by manufacturing exactly what I'd been primed to expect. Except, when I finally forced myself to look at the mirror in the morning light, I saw something I couldn't explain. On the surface of the glass, in the fine layer of dust that had accumulated there, someone had drawn a symbol, a circle with a vertical line through it, bisected by a horizontal line at the top. It looked like a simplified door or a cross or something older than either. I didn't draw it. No one had been in my apartment. And as I stared at it, trying to understand, I heard a whisper, faint, distant, coming from somewhere I couldn't locate. "Help me." A girl's voice, young and afraid and very, very far away. "Help me before it's too late."
Chapter 3. The First Possession. I told myself I wouldn't tell anyone. It was easier that way. Easier to pretend I wasn't losing my grip on reality. Easier to explain away each subsequent incident as stress or imagination or the peculiar acoustics of an old building. For 3 days I managed. For 3 days I avoided the mirror as much as I could, slept with the lights on, and threw myself into work with the desperation of someone trying to outrun their own thoughts. But Derek came back. He showed up on Thursday evening, a bottle of cheap whiskey in one hand and a laptop bag slung over his shoulder, grinning like a kid who'd discovered a new toy. "You have to see this," he said, pushing past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. "I've been researching the midnight door thing, and it goes so much deeper than that TikTok video. There are forums, Mara, forums dating back to the early 2000s, people documenting their experiences, sharing different versions of the ritual. Derek, I don't really want to, and get this." He was already setting up his laptop on my coffee table, directly facing the mirror. "Some of them claim you can do follow-up rituals, ask more questions, establish ongoing communication with whatever's on the other side. Apparently, the first time just opens the door, but if you keep engaging—" "Derek, stop." Something in my voice finally penetrated his enthusiasm. He looked up at me, really looked, and his grin faltered. "What's wrong? You look like shit." "Thanks. I mean it. You look like you haven't slept in days." I hadn't, not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale girl pressing her hand against the glass, her mouth working silently, her eyes full of warnings I couldn't understand. "I just think we should leave the mirror alone," I said carefully. "The ritual was a joke, it was fun, but I don't want to keep—" Something happened. It wasn't a question. Derek was looking at me with sudden intensity, his earlier excitement transformed into something hungrier. "What did you see? Did something come through? Did you hear something? See something in the glass? Come on, Mara, you can tell me." "I don't want to talk about it. But this is exactly what I'm researching. I'm documenting experiences, collecting data, trying to figure out the pattern. If you saw something, Derek, please." He studied me for a long moment. Then he picked up his laptop and walked toward the mirror. "What are you doing?" "Just looking." He stood directly in front of the glass, his reflection staring back at him with an expression I couldn't read. "You know, the forums say that certain mirrors are more receptive, something about the age of the glass, the history of the frame. If this mirror really came from somewhere with significance, it could be one of the ones that actually works." "Derek, I'm just looking."
He leaned closer to the glass. His breath fogged the surface, and in the fog I saw something move. Just for an instant, a flicker of darkness behind his reflected face, a shape that might have been a hand reaching toward him. "Do you see anything? Anything at all?" "Derek, step back!" It wants me to ask a question. His hand rose toward the glass. It wants me to open the door. "Derek!" He touched the mirror. Nothing happened. At least nothing I could see, but he stood there, frozen, his palm pressed flat against the glass, his eyes unfocused and staring at something I couldn't perceive. The moment stretched. 5 seconds, 10, 30, and I stood paralyzed, unable to move, unable to look away, watching his reflection and waiting for something terrible to happen. Then he stepped back, and everything was normal again. The cold vanished, the vibration stopped. Derek blinked, shook his head a slight, and turned to face me with an easy smile. "See? Nothing to worry about." He picked up his laptop, tucked it back into his bag. "I should go. Got a lot of research to do." "Derek, wait. I'll text you tomorrow. We should do this again. Maybe invite Jess and Casey." He paused at the door, looking back at me with that same easy smile. "You know, you really should pay more attention to the mirror. There's so much to learn." He left. I stood in my apartment, the echo of his words hanging in the air, and tried to convince myself that I'd imagined the wrongness, because there had been wrongness. I was certain of it, even if I couldn't articulate exactly what. Something in the way he spoke, something in the rhythm of his sentences, the flatness of his tone beneath the surface friendliness, the way he looked at the mirror in those final seconds, with an expression that wasn't quite curiosity and wasn't quite hunger, but something else entirely. Something had stepped through. I didn't know how I knew it, but I knew it with a certainty that settled into my bones like ice. Something had looked out through Derek's eyes in those final moments, something that smiled at me with his mouth and spoke with his voice and walked out of my apartment in his body, something that wanted me to open the door. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of the mirror. It didn't help. At exactly 3 a.m., the knocking came anyway. 3 slow, deliberate impacts that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And in my dreams, I saw Derek standing in a church I'd never visited, his arms raised in supplication, his face turned toward a darkness that moved and breathed and whispered his name. He was smiling. He was smiling, and his eyes were entirely black.
Chapter 4. Digging into the Legend. I started researching the next morning, the way you probe a wound to see how deep it goes. I told myself it was practical. If something was happening, if the mirror was truly what I was beginning to fear it was, then information was the only weapon I had. But beneath that rationalization lurked something uglier, the desperate hope that I would find a logical explanation, that I would discover the midnight door ritual was nothing more than an elaborate hoax, that my experiences could be filed safely away under stress-induced hallucinations and forgotten. The internet gave me contradictions. The viral TikTok version of the ritual was everywhere, sanitized, gamified, stripped of context, and presented as a spooky challenge for teenagers with too much time and too little sense. But beneath that surface layer, I found older roots, forums from the early 2000s, archived blog posts from defunct websites, threads in occult message boards that hadn't been active in years. The ritual had other names: the Door of Souls, the Mirror Passage, the Threshold Rite. The earliest reference I could find dated back to 1987, a post on a bulletin board system that no longer existed, preserved only in fragmentary archives. The author claimed to have learned it from their grandmother, who had learned it from a group of people who'd practiced old ways in a small town in the Midwest. My small town in the Midwest.
I don't know how long I sat staring at my laptop screen before I fully processed what I was reading. The author hadn't named the town directly, but the details were unmistakable. The old stone church on the hill, the river that flooded every spring, the college that had been founded on land donated by a family nobody talked about anymore. My town, my campus, my home for the past 3 years. I dug deeper. The university library had an archive section, dusty and neglected, staffed by a student worker who barely looked up when I entered. I spent hours there, pulling boxes from shelves, leafing through yellowed newspapers and faded photographs, searching for any mention of mirrors, rituals, or doors. What I found was worse than I had expected. The church appeared first, St. Elodia's, according to the cornerstone in one photograph, though no saint by that name had ever been recognized by any major denomination. It had been built in 1892 by a private congregation and abandoned in 1957 after a fire that killed 7 people. The newspaper articles from that time were carefully vague. Tragic fire claims local worshippers, investigation ongoing. But between the lines, I read something else. References to unusual practices, a quote from a firefighter who described the interior as unlike any church I've ever seen, a mention buried in paragraph 6 of a large mirror found in the ashes, miraculously undamaged despite the blaze. I found the mirror again in 1962 in a society page photograph from a charity auction. It was hanging in the background of a shot of wealthy donors, its iron frame unmistakable. The caption identified the location as the home of Eleanor Whitfield, a local philanthropist known for collecting unusual artifacts. Eleanor Whitfield had died in 1963. The newspaper called it a suicide, though the specifics were kept tastefully obscure. Her estate had been dispersed at auction, and the mirror had vanished from the historical record. Until now, until my apartment, my $300 a month murder scene, with its bolted furniture and its former tenant who, according to the property records I illegally accessed, had moved out in the middle of the night and left no forwarding address. There was one more document in the archive that made my blood run cold. A photograph tucked into a folder marked Miscellaneous Local History, showing the interior of St. Elodia's church before the fire. The image was grainy, professionally lit, clearly taken for some official purpose. It showed the altar, not a traditional Christian altar, but a raised platform covered in dark cloth, surrounded by symbols I almost recognized. And behind the altar, mounted on the wall where a cross should have hung, was my mirror. The same frame, the same glass, the same subtle wrongness in the reflection, which seemed to show an empty church, even though the photographer must have been standing right there. At the bottom of the photograph, someone had written in pencil, "The door. Do not open." I left the library feeling like I had swallowed glass. The sun was setting by the time I emerged, painting the campus in shades of orange and red that made everything look like it was on fire. I walked without thinking, my feet carrying me through familiar paths while my mind churned with impossible information. The mirror was old, the mirror was wrong, the mirror had a history of death and disappearance stretching back over a century, and somehow it had ended up in my apartment, bolted to my wall, waiting for someone stupid enough to knock on it at 3 in the morning and recite a phrase that would open the door. I was almost home when my phone buzzed. "Derek, hey, thinking about the mirror again. We should talk." I stared at the message for a long time. His voice echoed in my memory, that flat, strange tone he used in those final moments before leaving my apartment. "You really should pay more attention to the mirror." Another buzz. "There's so much more to learn. You have no idea." I turned off my phone, and walked faster. But even as I hurried home, even as I double-locked my door and checked every shadow in my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already too late. The door was open, something had come through, and now, whatever it was wearing my friend's face and waiting to see what I would do next. In the mirror, my reflection watched me with eyes that didn't quite track with my movements, and somewhere in the glass, deep down where the light couldn't reach, I thought I heard a girl screaming.
Chapter 5. The Ghost's Story. I bought candles. Not because I believed they would protect me. I was past the point of believing anything would protect me. But because the girl in the mirror seemed to respond better to fire. The overhead lights made her flicker and fade, barely visible. But in candlelight, she grew more solid, more present, more desperately trying to communicate. By the third night after my visit to the library, I had decided to stop running and start listening. I set up the candles in a careful circle on the coffee table, facing the mirror. White candles, because the internet said white was for protection and communication, and I was grasping at any straw I could find. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the flames dancing in my peripheral vision, and I waited. "I know you're there," I said to the mirror. My voice sounded strange in the candlelit apartment, too small, too thin, like the darkness was eating the sound. "I've seen you. I know you're trying to tell me something." Nothing happened. I took a deep breath. "I've been researching the mirror, St. Elodia's Church, the fire in 1957, the deaths. I know there's a history here, and I think you're part of it." The candle flames flickered, though there was no draft. "My name is Mara. I live here now, and I don't know how to help you, but I want to try. Please, help me understand." Silence. Then, slowly, the mirror began to fog. It started at the edges, creeping inward like frost on a winter window, and in the fog I saw the girl take shape. She was clearer tonight than she'd ever been. I could see the color of her eyes, gray like storm clouds, the texture of her dress, wool, old-fashioned, something a girl might have worn in the 1950s. The expression on her face, fear, exhaustion, desperate hope. She raised her hand and pressed it against the glass. Beneath her palm, letters began to form in the condensation, slow, laborious, as if each one cost her tremendous effort. MYNAMEISRUTH. "Ruth," I whispered. The girl, Ruth, nodded. Her eyes were wet with tears that didn't fall, and her mouth worked silently, still unable to produce sound on my side of the glass. More letters appeared. IDIEDHERE. "In this apartment?" She shook her head, then seemed to reconsider. Her hand moved again, slower now, the fog beginning to fade. INTHEMIRROR. "You died in the mirror? I don't understand." THEDOOR. Her image was flickering, losing coherence. I leaned forward, desperate to catch whatever she was trying to tell me before she disappeared entirely. "The door? You mean the ritual? The midnight door?" Ruth's expression transformed into something terrible. Recognition, horror, grief, all tangled together. She nodded frantically, her form growing more transparent by the second. IOPENEDIT. And then, in a rush, as if she'd found some final reserve of strength, the letters came faster. SOMETHING.
The candles went out all at once, plunging the apartment into darkness. But in that darkness, for just an instant, I saw Ruth's face pressed against the mirror from the inside, her mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear, her eyes fixed on something behind me. Something that breathed in the darkness, something that moved with the sound of rustling cloth and dry, rattling laughter. I threw myself toward the light switch, slamming my palm against the wall until the overhead lights buzzed to life. The apartment was empty. The mirror showed only my own terrified reflection. But on the glass, written in what looked horrifyingly like water dripping from the inside, were two final words: "Destroy it." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner farthest from the mirror, all the lights blazing, my phone clutched in my hands, and I thought about what Ruth had shown me. She had been like me once, young, probably local, a girl from the 1950s based on her clothes, who performed some early version of the midnight door ritual. Maybe she'd learned it from the congregation at St. Elodia's church, before the fire, before the deaths. Maybe she was curious, reckless, eager to speak with the dead, or glimpse the future, or ask the questions that burned in her heart. And something came through. Not just a ghost, not just a spirit, something that trapped her soul, bound her to the mirror, used her as, what, a lure? A warning? Both? "It serves something worse," she had written, the one in the dark behind the glass. I thought about Derek, standing before the mirror with his hand pressed against the glass, his eyes going unfocused as something stepped through. I thought about the way he'd spoken afterwards, the wrongness in his voice, the hunger behind his smile. The demon, because that was what I was calling it now, might as well use the word, had found a new host. But Ruth had said it served something worse, something older, something that lurked in the darkness behind the glass like a spider at the center of its web. "Destroy it," she had begged. But how do you destroy a mirror that's bolted to a wall? How do you break glass that survived fires and decades and the deaths of everyone who's ever owned it? And what happens to the souls trapped inside when the door finally closes? I looked at my phone and saw 17 missed calls from Derek, 12 text messages, each one stranger than the last. "The door is open, Mara. We're all invited to the feast. Don't you want to know what's on the other side? The one who waits is so very hungry." I turned off my phone and stared at the mirror until dawn. Somewhere inside the glass, Ruth was still screaming, and somewhere deeper, behind the glass, something was waiting.
Chapter 6. The Demon Unmasked. Derek came back 4 days later. He didn't knock. He didn't call. One moment I was standing in my kitchen, staring at the coffee maker like it could somehow explain my life choices, and the next moment he was simply there, standing in my living room, watching me with eyes that held no warmth. "How did you get in?" He smiled. It wasn't his smile.
I knew that now, could see the wrongness in it the way you see a crack in a photograph, but it wore his face with practiced ease. "Doors open for me," he said. "They always have." I backed toward the counter, my hand closing around a kitchen knife I had no confidence in using. "What do you want?" "To help you understand." He walked toward the mirror, and I watched his reflection match his movements with perfect synchronicity. "You've been researching. I can smell the library dust on you, but research won't give you the answers you're looking for." "And you will?" "The mirror will." He ran his fingers along the iron frame, almost lovingly. "It's a door, Mara, the oldest door, the truest door. It leads to a place where questions and answers are the same thing, where the dead and the living are the same thing, where everything becomes one in the embrace of the one who waits." "The one who waits?" "Some called it a god." His voice changed, dropping into a register that didn't sound human anymore. "Some called it a demon. Some called it nothing at all, because to name it was to invite its attention. But the congregation at St. Elodius, they knew what it truly was, the shadow saint, the door behind all doors, the hunger that remembers." He turned to face me, and I saw that his eyes had changed. In the candlelight of the kitchen, the pupils had expanded until there was no white left, no color, just endless black, deep as the space between stars. "They built this mirror as an altar," he continued, his voice layered now with something older, something vast. "They performed the ritual to open the way, and when the door opened, oh, the things that came through, the things that fed." "The fire," I whispered, "the 7 deaths." "Offerings." The word was almost tender, the first of many, but the congregation was weak, frightened. They tried to close the door before the work was complete, so the mirror slept, passing from hand to hand, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to wake it again. "Ruth woke it." "Ruth." Something like amusement flickered across Derek's possessed face. Poor Ruth. She knocked on the door hoping to speak with her dead brother. Instead, she spoke with me, and I showed her such wonders before I took her into the dark. I felt sick. "You killed her." "I collected her." He stepped closer, and I pressed myself back against the counter, the knife trembling in my grip. "Look into the mirror, Mara." His voice was gentle, almost kind, the way you'd speak to a frightened child. "Look and see what's waiting for you. It's beautiful, really, the ending of everything, the place where all doors lead." He forced my head toward the glass. I saw my reflection, terrified, tear-streaked, eyes too wide. I saw Derek's reflection, his black eyes gleaming with hunger. And behind us both, I saw the darkness that wasn't darkness, the shadow that moved with intention, the vast and terrible shape that lurked in the depths of the mirror like a leviathan in an infinite sea. Eyes opened in that darkness, thousands of them, millions of them, each one a soul that had been taken, a life that had been consumed, a question that had been answered with annihilation. And at the center of all those eyes, I saw the outline of something massive, something that had been old when humanity was young, something that had waited behind every reflection, in every polished surface, patient and eternal, and so very, very hungry. The one who waits. Its attention turned toward me. I felt it like a physical weight, like the pressure of deep water, like the moment before lightning strikes. It saw me, it knew me, and in that knowing, I understood what the demon was, not a separate entity, not a servant, but an extension, a finger of the vast hand in the darkness, reaching through the crack in reality to drag souls into the endless black. Ruth's reflection screamed, not silently. For the first time I heard her voice, thin and distant and tortured beyond endurance. "Close your eyes! Don't let it see you! Close your eyes!" I closed my eyes, and in the darkness behind my lids, I felt something snap, a connection, a link, a chain that had been forming between my consciousness and the thing in the mirror. Derek's grip loosened as the demon inside him howled with frustration, and I tore myself free, running for the door, running for the street, running for anywhere that wasn't here. Behind me, I heard Derek's voice calling my name, and beneath it, older and colder, I heard the whisper of something that would never stop hunting me. The door was open, and now it knew my face.
Chapter 7. The Deity in the Shadows. I spent 3 nights at Jess's apartment, sleeping on her couch with every light on and every mirror covered. She didn't understand. How could she? She hadn't seen what I'd seen, hadn't felt the crushing weight of the one who waits pressing against her consciousness like a hand on a throat. But she could tell something was wrong, deeply wrong, and she was friend enough to ask questions I couldn't answer and accept the inadequate explanations I offered. "Derek's been acting weird," she told me on the second night. "He came by yesterday, asked if I'd been practicing the ritual. When I said no, he just stared at me for like 5 minutes, didn't blink. It was creepy as hell." "Stay away from him. Please, promise me." "Mara, what's going on? What happened?" But how could I tell her? How could I explain that our friend was a puppet now, a mask worn by something that had crawled through a crack in reality? How could I make her understand that the stupid TikTok ritual we'd performed as a joke had actually worked, had opened a door to something ancient and hungry, and now that door would never fully close? I couldn't. So instead, I kept researching. The university library had given me the surface-level history, but I needed more. I needed to understand what the one who waits truly was, where it had come from, and whether there was any way to close the door it had opened. The answer came from an unlikely source, an antiquarian bookstore downtown, run by an elderly woman who collected occult texts the way other people collected stamps. I'd stumbled across her shop while wandering the city in a daze of sleeplessness, and something about the symbols in the window, a stylized door bisected by a cross, had drawn me inside. Her name was Marion, and she knew about the mirror. "Saint Elodius," she said, setting a cup of bitter tea in front of me. I wondered when someone would come asking about it. They always do eventually, anyone who gets too close to that thing. "You know what it is?" "I know what it was built to be." She pulled a leather-bound book from her shelves, its pages yellow with age and covered with dense handwritten text. It was called The Testament of Elodia, and it told a story that made my blood freeze in my veins. The congregation of Saint Elodius had never worshipped any Christian god. The name was a mask, a disguise, chosen because the entity they served had no name in any human language. They called it the Shadow Saint, the one behind mirrors, the hunger that remembers. Titles, not names, attempts to describe something that existed outside the boundaries of human comprehension. It was old. Older than humanity, older than Earth, perhaps older than the universe itself. It existed in the spaces between reflections, in the thin places where reality grew weak, and it fed on consciousness the way fire feeds on fuel. Every time someone looked into a reflective surface, a mirror, a pool of water, a sheet of polished metal, they gave it a tiny piece of themselves. Not enough to notice, not enough to matter, but the congregation wanted more. They had built the mirror as a concentrated doorway, a tear in the fabric of reality that would allow the shadow saint to reach through more directly. The ritual was the key, a sequence of actions that widened the crack just enough for its servants to pass through. The demons, I said, the things that possess people. Extensions of it, she confirmed, like fingers on a hand. They reach through the door, find suitable hosts, and begin preparing the way for their master to fully emerge. Preparing how? By collecting souls. Each consciousness they take strengthens the door, widens the crack. Enough souls, and the door opens completely. The shadow saint steps through, and then, she shrugged, a gesture too casual for the horror she was describing. Then everything ends. Every reflection becomes a door. Every surface becomes a gateway. Reality drowns in darkness, and all that remains is the hunger. That night, a storm rolled in. The power went out at 2:47 a.m. I was awake, of course, always awake now, and in the sudden darkness, I heard it. Knocking. Not on my door, not on the walls, knocking from inside the mirrors. Jess's apartment had 3 mirrors, one in the bathroom, one in her bedroom, and a small decorative one in the hallway. I had covered them all with blankets and towels, but the knocking came anyway, muffled but insistent, 3 slow beats, repeated over and over. I pressed my hands over my ears, but I could still hear it. And then the blankets began to fall. I don't know how. There was no wind, no logical explanation, but one by one, the coverings slid off the mirrors. I tried to catch them, tried to press them back into place, but they kept falling, as if pulled by invisible hands. The bathroom mirror was the first to reveal itself. I saw my reflection in the candlelight, pale, terrified, more shadow than person. And behind my reflection, in the depths of the glass, I saw the church. Saint Elodius before the fire, stone walls and stained glass, and the mirror hanging where the altar should be. Figures in dark robes moved through the space, performing a ritual I half recognized, their voices chanting words I couldn't quite hear. The bedroom mirror showed something else. A room that looked like my apartment, but wrong. The angles were off, the shadows fell in the wrong directions, and the mirror hung in a place where the wall had rotted away, revealing darkness beyond. In that darkness, shapes moved, figures that once had been human, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams, reaching towards the glass like drowning swimmers, reaching for the surface. The hallway mirror showed the worst, just darkness, endless, absolute darkness, and in that darkness, something opened. Not eyes, something worse than eyes, something that saw without seeing, that knew without knowing, that existed in a state of hunger so pure that it had become a form of being. The shadow saint. I saw its outline in the darkness, vast beyond comprehension, a shape that existed in more dimensions than my mind could process. It filled the mirror, filled the darkness behind the mirror, filled the spaces between realities where light had never touched and never would. And it saw me. Soon, a whisper in my mind, not a voice, but a pressure, an intrusion, a violation. The door opens, the feast begins. You will know such peace in our hunger. The power came back on with a buzz and a crackle, flooding the apartment with electric light. The visions in the mirrors vanished, replaced by ordinary reflections, ordinary walls, ordinary reality. But the whisper lingered in my mind, echoing in the spaces between my thoughts. Soon. I knew then that covering mirrors wouldn't help, running wouldn't help, The door was opening, widening with every soul the demon collected, and if I didn't find a way to close it, the Shadow Saint would step through and devour everything. Ruth had told me to destroy the mirror. Marion had told me such destruction might be possible if the ritual was performed correctly, if the conditions were right, if someone was willing to pay the price. I didn't ask what the price was. I was starting to suspect I already knew.
Chapter 8. Attempt to break the curse. The book provided a counter-ritual. Marion let me photograph the pages, her expression grim as I documented the dense handwriting, the diagrams, the warnings written in margins and crossed out and written again. The congregation knew what they were unleashing, she said, some of them at least. They included fail-safes, ways to close the door if things went wrong. But then things did go wrong, and they discovered that closing a door to the Shadow Saint isn't as simple as opening one. What do I need? You need to perform the ritual at the site of the original opening, the mirror itself, not just any mirror. You need to perform it at 3 a.m. when the door is naturally at its widest. You need symbols, offerings, specific words spoken in specific orders. She paused. And you need someone on the other side to help you push. Ruth? If that's the name of the spirit trapped in the glass, then yes, her soul is bound to the door. She can help you close it from within, but only if she's willing to accept the consequence. Which is, the door closes on everything inside. The demon, the collected souls, the ghost, all of it gets sealed away, cut off from the Shadow Saint forever. It's a kind of death, I suppose, a final ending. I thought about Ruth, the fear in her eyes, the desperate way she'd tried to warn me, the years she'd spent trapped in the mirror's darkness. Would she accept annihilation if it meant stopping the Shadow Saint? Would I have the right to ask? But there was no other choice. I gathered supplies, white candles, salt, a small knife for drawing blood. The ritual required a willing sacrifice, the book said, though it didn't specify how much, and a copy of the symbols I would need to draw. I texted Jess and told her I was fine, everything was fine, I just needed to take care of something. She didn't believe me, I could tell from her responses, but she also didn't try to stop me. At midnight, I went back to my apartment. The mirror was waiting. I could feel its awareness the moment I opened the door, a pressure against my consciousness, a weight in the air, an almost electrical sensation that made my skin crawl and my hair stand on end. The apartment was dark, the streetlights outside barely penetrating the gloom, but the mirror seemed to glow with its own dim luminescence. I set up the candles in a circle around me, facing the glass. I drew the symbols on the floor in salt, checking and rechecking them against my photographs. I held the knife in my right hand, ready for the moment when blood would be required. At 2:50 a.m., I began. I stand before the door between. I stand before the door unseen. By these symbols, by this blood, I demand the closing of the flood. The candle flames flickered. In the mirror, Ruth appeared. She was more solid than I'd ever seen her, almost alive, her gray eyes wide with hope and terror in equal measure. She pressed her hands against the glass, and I pressed mine against the opposite side, and for a moment we were connected, two women separated by death and time and a door that should never have been opened. "You came back," she mouthed. "I came to close it, but I need your help. I need you to push from the inside while I push from outside, and I need you to understand." "I know." Her expression was sad, resigned, but also strangely peaceful. "I've been waiting so long. Please, end this." I cut my palm. The blood welled up,
dark in the candlelight, and I pressed it against the mirror's surface. The glass was ice cold, colder than anything natural, and where my blood touched it, the surface began to ripple. By blood freely given, by the souls freely offered, I command the door to close. I command the darkness to recede. I command... The apartment door slammed open. Derek stood in the doorway, but Derek was gone. Whatever remained of him had been entirely consumed by the demon wearing his body. His eyes were pits of absolute darkness, his smile stretched too wide, his limbs bent at angles that no human skeleton could achieve. "Did you think we wouldn't know?" The voice that emerged from him was layered, dozens of tones overlapping, ancient and hungry and amused. He moved towards me, and the candles guttered in his wake. I kept reciting. The words felt like weapons now, each syllable a blow against the darkness pressing in around me. In the mirror, Ruth was chanting too. I couldn't hear her, but I could see her lips moving, could feel the power building on both sides of the glass. Derek's hand closed around my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. The ritual was dying on my lips as consciousness began to fade. But Ruth didn't stop. In the mirror, she pressed both hands against the glass and screamed, a scream I finally, impossibly heard, piercing through the barrier between worlds with nothing but pure, desperate will. The sound hit the demon like a physical force, driving it back, loosening its grip on Derek's body. I gasped for air and finished the ritual. "By the blood of the living and the will of the dead, I command this door to close. I command the darkness to recede. I command..." Light erupted from the mirror. For one shining moment, the apartment was flooded with brilliance. Not warm light, not cold light, but something else entirely. An illumination that seemed to come from the space between colors, from the place where reality folded in on itself. I saw the demons howling, saw the Shadow Saint's attention suddenly and furiously focused, saw Ruth's face transformed with hope as the door began to shrink. And then the darkness pushed back. It came from the mirror like a tidal wave, like a living thing, like a god waking from a long and hungry sleep. The light was devoured, consumed, erased from existence. The symbols on my floor began to smoke. The candles exploded into shards of wick and wax. The door didn't close. Instead, it opened wider. In the mirror, behind Ruth's terrified form, I saw it clearly for the first time, the Shadow Saint in all its terrible majesty, a darkness that wasn't darkness, but rather the absence of everything, reaching towards the glass with extensions that might have been arms or tentacles, or simply hunger given form. "Foolish," the pressure in my mind growled. "The door cannot be closed from outside. The door can only be closed from within." Ruth's eyes met mine through the glass. She understood. I saw the realization dawn on her face, saw her make a decision that had been waiting for her for 70 decades. And then she turned away from me, towards the darkness, and began to walk.
Chapter 9. The Sacrifice. "Ruth, no!" But she was already moving, her form growing smaller as she walked deeper into the mirror's darkness, toward the vast and terrible shape that waited at the heart of everything. The Shadow Saint's attention shifted, drawn away from me, focusing on the soul that was voluntarily approaching its maw. Derek's body collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, the demon inside him suddenly distracted, suddenly uncertain. I heard him gasp, really gasp, with Derek's voice, Derek's fear, and I knew that whatever was puppeting him had loosened its grip. "Mara!" His voice was weak, confused, threaded with terror. "Mara, what's happening? I can't see. There's something in my head, something." "Don't move," I said. "Just stay still." But I couldn't look away from the mirror.
Ruth had stopped walking. She stood at the threshold of the deeper darkness, her back to me, her shoulders squared with a courage I couldn't imagine possessing. Beyond her, the shadow saint pulsed with hunger, its vast, incomprehensible form pressing against the boundaries of the mirror like an ocean against a dam. She turned her head, just slightly, and I saw her profile, the sharp line of her jaw, the curve of her cheekbone, the quiet determination in her expression. 70 years she had been trapped in this darkness, 70 years of screaming without sound, of watching helplessly as others fell into the same trap, of feeding a god she had never meant to summon, and now she was going to end it. I understood, finally, what the book had meant. The door could only be closed from within, not with rituals or blood or ancient words, but with an act of will, a soul choosing to seal itself inside forever, to become the lock that held the door shut. Ruth was going to become the door. "There has to be another way," I whispered, pressing my hands against the glass. "Please, you've suffered enough. Let me find another way." She couldn't hear me. The barrier between us was too thick now, the darkness too dense. But she turned fully, one last time, and she smiled. It was the first time I had seen her smile. She raised her hand in something that might have been a wave, or a blessing, or simply goodbye. And then she mouthed 3 words, clear enough that I could read them even through the rippling glass. "Close your eyes." I closed them. Behind my lids, I felt rather than saw what happened next. A surge of power, cold and bright and terrible, like lightning striking in the depths of the ocean. A scream that wasn't a scream, the Shadow Saint's fury given voice, a sound that existed outside of sound, that vibrated in my bones and my blood and the spaces between my thoughts. And then, slowly, impossibly, the pressure began to ease. I felt the door shrinking, not closing, not yet, but contracting, the crack in reality growing narrower as something pushed against it from the other side. Ruth, I realized. Ruth was pushing, using her own soul as a wedge, forcing the gap to close inch by impossible inch. But it wasn't enough. She was one soul against a god, one small, brave, broken soul trying to hold back an ocean of darkness with nothing but her will. No. I opened my eyes. The mirror was chaos, light and shadow warring across its surface, Ruth's form barely visible at the center of the maelstrom, the Shadow Saint's tendrils reaching for her, like a drowning man reaching for the surface. She was failing. She was dying. She was going to be consumed, and the door would open and everything would end. Unless... I looked at my bleeding palm, at the knife still clutched in my other hand, at the symbols on the floor still smoldering but not entirely destroyed. The door could only be closed from within, but who said I had to stay on the outside? "Mara!" Derek's voice, stronger now, more coherent. "Mara, what are you doing?" I didn't answer. I couldn't answer. I was already moving, already raising the knife, already cutting deeper into my palm until the blood flowed freely, until it ran down my wrist and dripped onto the floor. "By blood freely given," I said, and my voice was steady, steadier than it had any right to be. "By life freely offered." I pressed my bleeding hand against the mirror. The glass rippled. It felt like falling, like diving into black water, like stepping off a cliff into emptiness, the world inverted, reality folding in on itself, and suddenly I was on the other side of the mirror, standing in darkness so complete that it had weight and texture and temperature. But I wasn't alone. Ruth was there, her form more solid now that we shared the same impossible space. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and for a moment she looked angry, furious even, before the anger dissolved into something like wonder. "You came through," she said. Her voice was real here, thin and hoarse from decades of screaming, but real. "No one's ever come through willingly before." "You needed help." I looked past her, into the deeper darkness where the Shadow Saint waited. It was smaller here, or rather I was seeing it differently, seeing the part of it that existed in this space rather than the vast totality that lurked beyond. Still terrible, still hungry, but not infinite, not unbeatable. The ritual, the closing ritual, it didn't work from outside because there wasn't enough power, but from in here. The power is the souls it's collected, all of us, everyone who ever got trapped. If we could reach them, convince them to push together. A tendril of darkness lashed toward us, and we threw ourselves apart, barely avoiding its touch. The Shadow Saint's attention was fully on us now, its hunger palpable, its fury shaking the very fabric of this in-between space. "Foolish," the pressure voice roared. "You have trapped yourself in my domain. Now you will feed me forever." Not forever, just long enough. I grabbed Ruth's hand. Her fingers were cold, dead cold, the cold of 70 decades in the dark, but they squeezed mine with desperate strength. "Where are the others, the collected souls?" she asked. They pointed into the darkness, toward a faint glimmer I hadn't noticed before. A cluster of lights, distant but visible, like stars glimpsed through storm clouds. "They're afraid," she said. "They've been prey for years. They've forgotten they were anything else. But if we can reach them, remind them." We ran. The Shadow Saint pursued, its tendril snapping at our heels, its hunger a physical force that pulled at our essence, trying to draw us back. The darkness was a maze, folding in on itself, paths appearing and disappearing with no logic or pattern. But Ruth knew the way. She had mapped this place in her decades of imprisonment, had found every corner and crevice where a soul could hide from the thing that hunted them. The lights grew brighter as we approached. I saw them clearly now. Not lights, but people. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, huddled together in a space that seemed slightly less dark than the rest. Their forms were translucent, worn thin by years of fear and feeding, but they were still recognizably human, still recognizably themselves. Some of them I recognized from my research. The congregation of St. Belodius, killed in the fire they had started trying to close the door. Eleanor Whitfield, the collector who had owned the mirror in the 1960s. Others I didn't know, victims stretching back decades, maybe centuries from every place the mirror had traveled. They looked up as we approached, and I saw hope kindle in their hollow eyes. "The door is open," Ruth said, their voice carrying through the darkness, "wider than it's ever been, but it can still be closed. We can still close it if we work together." "We can't," one of the congregation, an old man with a face like weathered stone. "We've tried. It's too strong." "It's strong because it's feeding on you, on your fear, your despair. You've been its food for so long that you've forgotten you could be anything else. But you're not food. You're people, your souls, and souls have power." "What power could we possibly have against that?" Another voice, female this time, thick with decades of hopelessness. I looked at Ruth. She nodded. "The power of the door itself," I said. "We can become the lock, not one soul, all of us, together, binding ourselves to the threshold, sealing the gap forever." Silence. Then, slowly, the old man stepped forward. "You mean dying, really dying, no more existing, no more anything, just ending?" "Yes." He considered this. Behind us, the Shadow Saint was closing in, its hunger growing more desperate, its tendrils reaching for the gathered souls. It knew what we were planning. It knew that if we succeeded, its door to the living world would be sealed forever. "We've been dead for a long time," the old man said finally. "I think I'm ready to find out what comes after." One by one, the other souls nodded. One by one, they joined hands, and as the Shadow Saint's fury shook the fabric of the in-between space, we began to recite the closing ritual together.
Chapter 10. The Door Closes. We spoke with one voice. I don't know how. We hadn't rehearsed, hadn't coordinated, hadn't done anything but join hands and open our mouths, but the words that emerged were the same from every throat. The ancient words of the closing ritual, the words that had failed when I spoke them alone, transformed by the power of dozens of souls speaking in perfect unison. By the blood of the living and the will of the dead, by the door that was opened and the door that we dread, by the souls that were taken and the souls freely given, we command this passage to close and be riven. The Shadow Saint screamed. Not the pressure voice, something worse, something that existed in a register beyond sound. The collected darkness of the in-between space convulsed, rippling like the surface of a disturbed pool. Tendrils lashed out wildly, trying to reach us, trying to break our circle, but the power of our joined voices held them back. I felt myself thinning, not physically. Here, in this space, I had no real body, but my essence, my consciousness, the part of me that made me Mara, I felt it spreading out, stretching, becoming less concentrated. The same thing was happening to the others. We were dissolving, not into nothing, but into something else, something larger. We were becoming the door. "Keep going," Ruth whispered beside me, and her voice was already fading, already becoming part of the closing. "We're almost there. Don't stop. Don't let go." The Shadow Saint made one final desperate lunge. It poured itself towards us, all of its hunger, all of its ancient malevolence, all the darkness it had accumulated over eons of feeding. The barrier of our joined voices buckled under the assault. I felt souls faltering, felt the old man's grip on my left hand weaken, felt the ritual beginning to collapse. But Ruth held on. She planted herself at the center of the circle, her will burning brighter than I had ever seen it, and she pushed back. Not with strength, she had no strength left, but with something else, with 70 years of suffering transformed into 70 years of fury, with the desperation of every warning she had tried to give, every scream that had gone unheard, every moment she had spent helpless while the thing that killed her grew stronger. "You don't get to win," Ruth screamed into the darkness. "Not this time, not ever again." The Shadow Saint recoiled, and in that moment of hesitation, the ritual completed. I felt the door close. It wasn't a physical sensation. There was nothing physical about any of this, but I felt it nonetheless. A sealing, a binding, a lock clicking into place that would never, ever open again. The crack in reality that the mirror had represented for over a century, finally, impossibly, closed. The Shadow Saint's presence vanished. Not destroyed, I could still feel it out there, beyond the seal, vast and hungry and eternal, but cut off, locked out, unable to reach through the door that we had become. We had won. But victory, I discovered, came with a price. I was dissolving. The process that had begun during the ritual was accelerating now, my essence spreading thinner and thinner, becoming part of the barrier that held the door closed. I could feel the others experiencing the same thing, the old man, the collected souls, Ruth, all of us merging into something that wasn't individual anymore. It didn't hurt. That surprised me. I had expected annihilation to hurt, expected the ending of self to be traumatic and terrible. But it wasn't. It was peaceful, almost warm, like falling asleep after a very long day. "Mara!" Ruth's voice, distant now, but still recognizable. "Ruth, is this... I don't know." I could feel her smile, even though I couldn't see her anymore. "I don't know what comes after, but it has to be better than what came before." "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I couldn't find another way." "You did save me." Her presence pressed against mine, warm and grateful. "You came through. No one ever came through for me before. That means everything." The dissolving continued.
I felt myself spreading across the threshold, becoming part of the seal, my consciousness expanding and thinning until I was barely Mara anymore. I was the door, I was the lock, I was the barrier that would hold the Shadow Saint at bay for as long as barriers existed. But something was pulling at me, a thread, thin but persistent, connected to something on the other side of the mirror, something in the living world, calling me back. Derek! His voice, distant and desperate, reciting words I almost recognized, the same words from the counter ritual, but different, modified, reversed, a pulling instead of a pushing. By the blood of the living, I call back the one who crossed over. By the bond of friendship, I reject this sacrifice. Return, Mara, return to the world of the living. Return. I felt myself being pulled in two directions, towards the seal and towards the living world, towards oblivion and towards existence. The other souls were too far gone to feel it, too committed to the closing, but I was still alive, still clinging to some fragment of my living self. I could go back. But if I went back, would the seal hold? Go, Ruth's voice, faint but firm. Mara, I can't, the seal. We have enough. The rest of us, we're committed. We'll hold. But you're still alive, Mara. Your body's still out there, and I think you might be needed. Needed for what? The mirror isn't the only door. Her presence was almost gone now, merged with the seal, becoming part of something larger. Someone needs to be there to stop it. I felt her push me, gently, lovingly, with the last of her individual will, towards the thread that connected me to the living world. Thank you, I said, for everything. Thank you for remembering me, a whisper barely there. Now go, live, and when you find the other doors. Her voice faded into silence. The thread pulled tighter, and I let go. I woke on the floor of my apartment, gasping, covered in blood from my slashed palm, staring up at a mirror that showed nothing but my own terrified reflection. Derek was kneeling beside me, his face pale and streaked with tears, a book open in his lap, the testament of Elodia, I realized, Marion's book. He must have found it, must have searched for any way to bring me back. Mara, can you hear me? Please say something. Derek, my voice was a croak, barely human. It worked. The door is closed. He stared at me for a long moment, and then he broke down sobbing, pulling me into a hug so tight it hurt. Over his shoulder, I looked at the mirror. It was just a mirror now, old glass in iron frame, showing nothing but my own terrified reflection. But as I watched, I thought I saw something, just for a moment, just a flicker. Ruth, smiling, raising her hand in a wave that might have been farewell. And then she was gone. The next few weeks were chaos. The authorities had questions about the blood on my floor, about Derek's strange behavior, about the property damage in my apartment. I told them a version of the truth: break-in, intruder, self-defense. They didn't believe me entirely, but they couldn't prove otherwise, and eventually they stopped asking. Jess and Casey knew something had happened, something beyond what I could explain. I told them enough to warn them, told them about mirrors, about rituals, about doors that should never be opened. Whether they believed me or not, they promised to be careful. Derek remembered everything. That was the hardest part. He remembered being possessed, remembered the things the demon had said through his mouth, remembered the hunger of the Shadow Saint pressing against his consciousness. Some nights he woke up screaming. Some nights he called me at 3 a.m. just to hear a human voice. We were bound together now, the two of us, survivors of something that should have killed us. I moved out of the apartment. The landlord didn't argue. I think he was relieved to be rid of the mirror, even though it was just a mirror now. I heard he had it destroyed, shattered into 1,000 pieces and buried in the local landfill. It didn't matter. Ruth had been right. The mirror isn't the only door. 3 months after the closing, I found another one, an antique shop in a neighboring town, a polished metal surface that seemed to drink the light around it. I felt the familiar pressure, the familiar wrongness, the familiar sense of something vast and hungry waiting on the other side. I bought it before anyone else could, and I destroyed it. That was the beginning of my new life, the life Ruth had pushed me back to live. I still teach, I still grade papers and attend faculty meetings and pretend to be a normal graduate student working towards a normal degree. But at night, when the rest of the world sleeps, I hunt. There are doors everywhere if you know how to look. Mirrors, windows, pools of water, sheets of polished metal. Any reflective surface can become a threshold given the right conditions and the wrong intentions. The shadow saint is patient, and its servants are